we're speaking with Tom Perry. Tom's the founder of Engaged Pursuit, and we'll be discussing his journey to how he got to where he is today and the value of developing your professional story as you determine your career path.
This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to the show, Tom.
Hey, thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, Tom, let's dive right in. How did you come to arrive at Engaged Pursuit, and what is it about?
You know, that's a great question. And I realized after being in corporate America for about 12 years that there is a big engagement problem. You know, people that I were working with did not love what they were doing. And I could see it every day with the folks I was working with. And I decided, after working in corporate America for about 12 years, to start my own company and my own gig to try to address this problem. And I am working on addressing this issue through a really focused career path. I feel like that is an area that people don't think about enough. And I am hoping to solve this engagement problem in corporate America through a really clear professional story and a really clear professional path for individuals.
That's great. So it sounds like you identified a gap.
Yeah.
And you're like, it doesn't seem like anyone else is kind of stepping in to fill that gap.
Yeah.
So let me step in and do that.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, they tried to solve the engagement problem through what I consider kind of weird solutions. You know, they did beer Fridays, or they do extra days off or whatever. And it sort of addressed the engagement problem in corporate America, but I felt that the real meat was coming from people just not loving what they were doing, or not knowing if they were in the right roles and if they were on a particular career path. It just didn't exist, and I saw that every day as a leader in that organization, and I decided to kind of merge the two and try to help companies become more engaged or have more engaged employees, and to help employees themselves become more engaged through a really clear understanding of what they're all about and their individual careers.
That's great, because really at the end of the day, all the beer in the world is it's not going to make Monday not roll around.
It helps a little bit. I mean, it helps a little bit, but I think
it's not the long-term solution.
Right.
Okay, so to that, let's talk about what your professional story is.
Yeah.
You've kind of touched on it,
Yeah.
but let's go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah. So, you know, at the end of the day, I really am a coach. You know, I have always been a person who has loved to help individuals succeed. You know, and so that really is the core of my professional story. It is really who I am, and it's something that I have done professionally in various roles, but also personally too. I've led groups in cycling classes. I've been a marathoner, and I've always been the kind of person who loves to energize and to motivate and to help people be successful. And so this transition for me from a leadership role in corporate America into being a coach really was a perfect transition for me, and one that I've been able to really seize and has given me a lot of energy professionally. So that really is the core of my professional story, is that coach, that leader, that motivator. I'm just really excited to be able to help people in this new adventure that I'm on.
That's awesome. So 12 years ago, did you think you'd be where you are today? Was it something that you had envisioned?
No. You know, my professional story before this really was quite linear. You know, I did a lot of nonprofit work when I got out of university, and I then became part of the .com adventure here in Seattle, and was riding that wave for a while, and then transitioned into, you know, a big software company here in Seattle, and really thought that was going to be it. You know, they really had a lot to offer, and they allowed me to explore some of my strengths and to build my capabilities. And I thought I was going to be there forever, you know, and I am really grateful that I had that experience, and that it gave me the experience and the opportunities and the contacts to be able to go out on my own. But yeah, I thought I was going to be there forever.
So it's been a nice surprise, it sounds like.
It really has. It took a lot of guts. Like it is hard to make a transition into something on your own. And so I get the anxiety that people have around a possible career transition. It's hard. It takes guts. It's not an easy journey. And I think a lot of people think, I'll just move to something else, or this will be easier and I'll just try something new. And it's hard, and especially going out on your own is extra difficult. And so there is a lot of planning that needs to take place and a lot of thought that needs to come into that decision. But once you make the decision and jump into something new, whether it be on your own or into something in another company, there is a sense of calm, and once you decide to move into something new, it actually becomes okay.
So to that, understanding what your professional story, whether it is you're moving to another part of the company or a new company or embarking on a new journey on your own outside of the traditional career path, it is incredibly important to understand what your professional story is so you can stay not on track, because one of the beautiful things about the evolution of our lives and careers is it's not always a straight line.
Yeah.
It can be, but it doesn't. It doesn't always work out like that. But if you have that understanding of what your professional story is, it perhaps helps you navigate through the uncertainty a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, it really creates intent. That is the single word that I have found in this experience that it really creates is intent. And people professionally, I found in my own practice, working with clients, and then even in my professional career, that just a lot of times that just doesn't exist. And so to really be clear about who you are professionally, that creates intent. And it could be intent for the future. So what am I working toward? What is that 3-5 year goal, which is a typical question that a lot of folks are asked in the interview process. I don't like that question, by the way. It's a tough one, but it also creates intent around what you're currently doing, and I think that that's another area that people don't think about enough, is that they don't realize or they don't understand the potential value of their current role, especially if it's not something they're loving. And by creating that professional story, they really understand, this role, it may not be perfect, but it does help me to achieve what I'm ultimately looking to do. Or on the other side, it really validates the fact that they are not in the right role. There are some folks I've worked with where they are they've moved into a role quickly, or there was a mass hiring and it was super exciting, and they got into the role and they're like, oh my gosh, this is truly not what I'm good at. And so it creates value and intent around that too, that the current role they're in maybe isn't the best fit. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's why I think the professional story is such a foundation and such a great tool to have in your toolkit, because it does create intent around both your current experience, good or bad, but then it really also it helps to create intent around what that future looks like too.
And it sounds like your professional story there's an evolution to it, right? Depending on where you are in career stage and possibly even life stage as well. So it's not I wrote my professional story 10 years ago and it still applies today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good example. You could be up for really being part of a dynamic startup, and you're wanting to really be part of a smaller team and building something. That could be part of your current professional story. That excites you. That's something you've done in the past that you found success in. And in the future, maybe that kind of crazy startup environment isn't necessarily for you. Maybe you do want something a little bit more stable because you have more responsibilities or whatever. And so it does evolve for sure, depending on what life stage you're in and kind of what your priorities are. But again, I look at that as being probably a 5 to maybe 10 year focus for individuals, and that's good enough. I think that doesn't need to be this major life thing.
Yep.
It really can evolve.
Yeah. So For folks that are perhaps thinking, I don't even know what I want for lunch, let alone 5 to 10 years from now, is it okay to kind of take those bite-sized pieces of your professional story, both looking at your past and it's easy to look back on hindsight and see things. But if asked the question in an interview, what do you want to do, in the next 3 to 5 years or 5 to 10, or just sitting and evaluating what your professional story is it okay to do kind of the baby steps with that to help it almost seem like it's a fluid process? Because thinking about 5 to 10 years, who knows? To think about where each of us were 10 years ago, there's no way that, we would think that we were probably sitting across from each other in a sound booth.
Right, exactly.
So it may seem like a daunting kind of exercise, but is it okay to maybe take it in smaller chunks?
Yeah, I think so. I think you kind of have to. I do think that you can easily get overwhelmed if you try to create this like perfect, elevator pitch that's just going to just roll off your tongue. I just don't. I think you can get there eventually, but I think that does take time and practice. And so I do think it's totally appropriate to really take baby steps in the creation of that professional story. And what I like to do, what I've done, is really think about what you're good at. It kind of sounds basic and a little bit elementary, but that's what I did. And I looked back when I was having a engagement problem myself, and I took some time and I evaluated what was I doing when I was loving my professional experience. And for me, it was hiring people, and it was interviewing people, and it was growing people. And so that kind of early stage development of folks. And for me also, it was around people's career discussion in my corporate job. I loved doing that. I got energy from that. And I really loved to get up and do those things in the corporate environment. And so I think exercises like that, where you evaluate what you love, and it's not necessarily what you maybe have been most successful with. Maybe it's something that, on paper it wasn't, the most successful, or you didn't have the most impact or whatever. You really should look at it from where were you having the most fun? And so that's kind of the basis of the story. And that's part of your strengths component, which is one of the 6 elements of the framework that I've built to help to create that story for individuals. And that's kind of the first piece, I think, that you can do on your own and just think about and write down where you were really loving life.
Yeah. That's great. Well, that actually leads to my next question of, we've most of us that have, and I would say anything from, our first job in high school or college through to more seasoned careers, we often hear the question, tell me about yourself, right? Which is a little cringeworthy because you're, it could be, what do you want me to say? So that might be a great way to, what would I tell? What would I say is my answer to that question?
It's like the first question that that people are asked, and it's the most dreaded question too. It's that one, like, tell me about yourself. And the other question that most folks are asked is, well, walk me through your resume, And so both of them in my mind are kind of the same. And what I like to do is really frame the conversation for the individual who's asking the question. So what most folks do is they will just instantly go into this 20-minute answer that is either like a bunch of random thoughts, or they literally will go step by step through their resume, and that takes like an hour. What I like to do is really frame the conversation using the professional story that hopefully folks have developed as their guide. So, for example, if someone were to say, well, tell me about yourself, Tom, I would, like I answered the question earlier, I would say, I'm a coach. I am someone who loves to help people succeed. And I have consistently done that throughout my tenure professionally, and I continue to do that in my own business. And I've seen great success helping people succeed with their careers. And so what that does is it puts a kind of a frame of reference for the individual who's asking the question around who you are. And so that could be I'm a coach. It could be I'm a project manager. It could be I'm a customer person. It could be I am I'm a leader or a technology person. It's not necessarily role specific, and that's where I think a lot of people, fumble is because they say, well, I am a account executive, or I'm an account manager, or I'm a PM. It could be that, but I am more of a fan of saying, what you're all about, and try to take it a little bit broader. And by saying you can think of me as, fill in the blank, that then allows the person asking the question then to put that, kind of hat on. They're like, okay, I can understand, who you are now. And then you go into some of the strengths that you've had and the successes that you've had. And that is a really quick, it was maybe a 30-second answer that is pretty, easy to say. And it does create a visual around who you are and, what you're really good at. And it doesn't need to be this review of the resume for 30 minutes.
Right. Well, and it sounds like it might be a key differentiator between you and the next candidate. Yeah, which is great because we're always looking for that, right?
Yeah.
Like, how is it that I make myself stand out from the other, especially for roles or companies that are highly sought after.
Right.
If you're one of 50 that they're reviewing, how do you make yourself stand out? And to be able to be in the interview, whether it be over the phone or in person, to be able to encapsulate in 30 seconds or less just kind of that intro.
Yep.
Because when a hiring manager goes into review of the candidate pool, oh, that's right, Tom mentioned that he was XYZ, and that may actually be that key component that makes you stand out.
Yeah, it also helps people, I think, in more casual environments to answer that question. If you think about it that way and use your professional story to help to guide your answer, because most times when you are networking and you're kind of out there looking for something new, if that is the path that you're on, there are a lot of times when you're at a bar or you're in an elevator or you're walking down the street with a buddy and they ask you, so like, what are you looking for? Or like, tell me about your experiences. How can I help? And that also helps to answer those kind of less formal interactions as well. So it helps in a variety of different situations. That's
great. So that leads into how it could potentially impact your career development, your career growth, or your career search, that regardless of whether it's in a formalized event or situation through to, one of our previous guests had mentioned that she happened to be on a ski lift with someone that, and that actually presented itself with a job opportunity that she may or may not have known about had she not been in that position at that time, but also being able to kind of articulate what it is that she was about as she's trying to figure out how to get off the ski lift, Exactly. So that's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So we're actually going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to ask Tom what his advice is on how to get really clear when developing your professional story.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
So we're here with Tom Perry, and Tom is the founder of Engaged Pursuit, and he's chatting with us today about professional stories. How do you develop your professional story? And Tom, you had actually mentioned earlier that there are 6 key elements. So let's talk about those 6 key elements and how someone can get clear on what their professional story is.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the first part of the professional story, and again, this is something that I created, a framework that I built based on my experiences professionally, and what I thought was what were important elements of a career. And the first piece I mentioned was strengths. And so I do think that it's super important to think about what you're good at. And I mentioned earlier that includes things that you might have received good feedback on. You've made a good impact or whatever. But it also includes things that you love doing, and you really find energy in doing, and you find you're smiling more than not. So that's the first piece. The second piece is around your values. And what I like to do with my clients, both individually as well as in the corporate experience, is to really think about what you value for yourself, but also what you want to have your boss value and what you want to have your company value. I think that is super important, And again, most people just don't think about that in their career. And for me, I want to be able to go out for a beer with my boss, and I want to be able to trust that my boss is going to be fair and is going to be a good guy or gal. And I think that is super important. And I want to work for a company that gives back. Again, I think that people just are so focused on that role that they don't think about things like values. So those are the first couple of elements. Those are the most squishy, as I call them. So that's the most kind of soul-searching and what takes the longest time for people to usually think about. The other four are a little bit more tactical. The first one is around organizational state. And again, I don't think people think about the kinds of environments that the business is in enough. And so there are various organizational states that I've developed, whether it be, startup kind of environment that I mentioned earlier, where it's kind of all hands on deck and kind of building, all the way across to businesses that are really well established and are just kind of running. There are certain people that love various environments, and I think that you need to think about that. Where have you most succeeded? Was it a crazy startup down in Pioneer Square here in Seattle, or is it in a 50,000 person corporate environment? So that's the third element. The fourth is around business results. So I do think that it's important to think about the specific businessy things that you've done that have had a lot of impact. The big initiatives, the big results that you've achieved that you can talk about very easily. So when you're asked the question, well, tell me about the great stuff you've done, you can answer that really easily. Let's see, what is that for? The fifth element is all around the environment. So again, I don't think that people think enough about things like commute or think about things like cube versus office. The other thing I don't think people think about enough is the people you're around. So are you an introvert or an extrovert? And do you like to be around a certain type or not? I read that book Quiet as I was making the transition, and I realized that I'm actually an introvert. And so me being around a bunch of extroverted, traditionally kind of salesy people doesn't work for me. And so that's something to take into consideration. So that's the fifth element, is around kind of the environment. Do you want to commute, and what kind of environment do you like? And then the final one is around opportunities. So that, again, takes a little bit of time to identify. But for me, it's around, certain skills that you want to develop. So, I want to be a better project manager, or I want to be better at sales. Certain competencies that you want to improve upon. So I want to be a better communicator, or I want to be a better leader. Those are things to consider. Or different experiences that you want. So I want to travel more, or I really want to, be a part of a large organization because I've always been kind of the small, medium-sized business. So those are the things to think about in that kind of opportunities view. And those six elements, when they kind of perfectly blend together, through my help, really does create that really easy to articulate story.
So that goes back to the general career and professional story. If someone doesn't, automatically the light bulb goes off, and I know exactly what that is. Mm-hmm. You've broken it down into these 6 steps that would allow you to, whether you work on multiple steps at a time or mm-hmm. one at a time, mm-hmm. you will find that once you get to the end of that exercise, mm-hmm. you do actually have that story.
Yeah,
or it'll be easier to identify what that is.
It really creates itself.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I do with my clients is create a dashboard dashboard experience from that, and it's kind of like a one-stop shop. It's a place where you can go to just see yourself professionally in one place, and it's really cool. It really does create this aha moment and kind of instant intent that I had mentioned earlier. And then the story really kind of writes itself.
That's
and
great.
it really is a kind of a beautiful thing that then creates a lot of confidence. I've literally seen people just their eyes light up and they're just like, oh my gosh, I never thought of or I never knew, this was kind of where I should be. And it's really awesome.
That's great. And it sounds like it could also be something that you could use both verbally but as well as a visual tool within your presentation, whether it be through online profiles or as a part of a one-on-one interview.
Yeah,
That's
or
fantastic.
even in the job search. So I've had people who are looking at certain roles and they see words like startup or, crazy environment or, we're building something new. And people who don't like that stuff, they will steer clear of those job descriptions because of the work we've done before.
That's great. Well, because it allows you to then not invest time and energy into that rather than actually put it into something that you're really going to be excited about. That's fantastic. So one of the things that you mentioned was around opportunity. You identifying both what you would like and also opportunity for creating or honing in on some areas of improvement. So sometimes in interviews or in conversations, you may be asked, so what are some of the areas that you found challenging or that you would like to improve on? What's the best way to message that into a positive, not a spin, because it's important to be authentic and realistic, but what is a more positive way to be able to message that?
That is by far the second most dreaded question that folks have. The first one, is tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. And the second one really is, where are you weak or what are the opportunities that you have professionally? And it's tough. I struggle with that myself too, because you want to be perfect and you want to focus on your strengths. But traditionally, that is a question that comes up during the interview process. And what I like to do is I really like to take a kind of self-critical, self-aware kind of approach to that question and acknowledge the fact that you are working on things and it is something that you are aware of and that there is a plan for solution. I think a lot of people will just say things like, well, I get overwhelmed easily, or I tend to sacrifice my work-life balance for work. And so those are all kind of answers that I've heard people give in the past. But I think if you say those things and then you also give the answer of I'm working on it, or here's the things that I'm doing to improve, and these are the successes or failures, I'm still working on it, or I found that if I leave by 6, I'm better than just have a kind of an open-ended time of departure. That really helps answer that question. And first of all, it makes you seem more human. And also it lets the person who's asking the question know that you're working on it, and it's not this thing that's going to possibly continue to be a problem in this new role.
And it sounds like going through the exercise of those 6 key elements will maybe help you identify some areas that you don't necessarily love, but it may be key to continue down the career path that you're wanting to pursue.
Yeah.
So it may be an opportunity to draw that out and go, what have I been working on, or do I need to start working on it?
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some of the things that our listeners can take action on today in developing their professional story?
So I think a couple things. One is to really sit down and identify your strengths. I think that is, as I mentioned earlier, kind of the core element to the professional story. And so I think an assessment or just a review, a mind map, whatever you want to call it, of what you're good at is really important. And again, I'm thinking about this from kind of a hard, tactical skill thing that you're good at. So I'm a good project manager, or I'm super organized or whatever. I'm a good salesperson. And then also take a softer look at it too. Like I am somebody who likes to motivate others, or I'm a team guy who likes to, go to events that create culture, within an organization. I think that's the first step. And then I think with that being the foundation, then really taking a look at your current role, and understanding and assessing if you're using those strengths the majority of the time. I'm not talking, 100% of the time. I do think there are times when you're not going to totally utilize all your strengths. But are you mostly doing this stuff, and are you excited in the work that you're doing? And I think that really will create a lot of excitement and potentially some scary realizations too. But just that exercise of really understanding your strengths and assessing against your current role, that really helps, and from there you can decide the path forward. But that exercise, and it doesn't need to take forever. I mean, when I did it for my transition, out of corporate life into what I'm doing now, it took me a couple hours. Of Tom time doing that.
Tom time.
Yes,
I like it.
Right.
We're going to trademark that if that's okay.
Yeah, it already is. No, I'm kidding. It's not.
Well, and so for folks that perhaps don't don't feel super confident in being able to articulate this beautifully worded, like, here are my strengths. Could it possibly just be a word salad, right? Just throwing out a bunch of words that would best describe, and then developing that or curating that kind of story around the strengths from there.
I also think it helps to talk to other people. One of the exercises within the strengths bucket is to take the perspective of your boss or your coworker, your best friend or your partner or spouse. And so talking to other people too, about your strengths can also help to create, some ideas and maybe some things you didn't think about too. So that also helps.
So soliciting feedback. Like if you were to describe me to someone else, what would you say?
Totally.
That's great. Because I think there's a way to approach that in a very informal way, but also formal as well. That's fantastic. So we're actually going to take one more quick break, and then we're actually going to just go through a couple of quick kind of lighthearted questions as we round out the interview. So don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back. Thanks for listening. Don't miss a single episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. So welcome back. We're actually going to just ask Tom a couple of questions as we round out the interview and before we head out today. So, Tom, let's talk about your first job.
Oh, boy.
So take us back. What was your first job?
So it was in Portland. My dad was a little small animal veterinarian, and he had his own practice in a suburb of Portland. And my brother and I were fortunate enough to have that experience as our first jobs. And I learned so much from that experience. One, I learned the importance of hard work and starting at the bottom. There were summers where my job was to clean the clinic and the stalls and all the elements of a veterinarian, and it really taught me the importance of hard work and that it does sometimes require you to start at the bottom and work your way up. I also really learned the basics of customer service. And so as part of my duties was to be the reception, welcome person. And so there were different things that I learned around staying organized and welcoming people. And if someone was in front of you and the phone rang, to address the person in front of you and to put the person who's calling on hold, because it's important to interact with the person right there and then. But it really taught me that the most cool thing I think that opportunity taught me was around empathy. And as a veterinarian, it can be quite emotional experience. And I saw firsthand the more soft side of business, I would say, that my father really helped me understand that there is an element of emotion in business, and there is a gray area of business, and that it's not all just right or wrong or black and white, that sometimes, you need to be there when people are not at their best state, and when there are tough situations that folks are in, that successful businesses can be flexible, and that's okay. And it just taught me a lot around, how to really empathize with people. And I've carried that along in my professional journey, working with people especially.
And as a young boy mucking out those stalls answering the phones, it must be incredibly fulfilling to be able to look back and see that journey and understand that fundamental kind of started at such a young age and carries with you today. That's fantastic. So let's chat about what you have read, listened to, or watched recently that you'd love to recommend to our listeners. Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan. All my friends and buddies will know that I'm a big self-help guy. So you'll always find me in that section, at Elliott Bay or whatever here in Seattle. But one book that I really dug was from a relatively new author. His name's Lewis Howes. And Lewis has a bunch of podcasts that if any of the listeners want to check out, it's called The School of Greatness. And he wrote a book recently called The School of Greatness. And I really loved what he had to say. It was a real casual guide, like the professional story, that had 6 or 7 elements to being great. And as I was struggling to make this transition and kind of having that epiphany around what I wanted to do next, this book really helped me, have the confidence and the excitement and the just the idea to go out on my own, that I'm going to be okay, And so his book, Lewis Howes, The School of Greatness, was a really big motivator for me as I was starting this journey.
That's great. And we'll actually have a link to the book and the podcast on thecareerq.com. So that's a fantastic reference. Thank you. So one of the questions that we ask our guests are, we always hear the question, what would you say to your 20-year-old self? And quite frankly, if we had time machines, we would be having a very different discussion right now.
That was so awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
But so let's turn that around. And if you were sitting down across the table having a cup of coffee with your 90-year-old self today, what do you think your 90-year-old self would say?
That you're doing good. And you're making an impact, and your path is, you're on the right path. And I think that that is something that I've always struggled with, and I think most of folks who are in corporate America struggle with as well. And I think the one thing I think that person would say to me is, you're doing good, and you're going to be fine, and that confidence piece is always something that I've struggled with, and I think that that's what my 90-year-old self would say is
that's great.
And it's keep spinning and keep running.
Well, so actually that's one of the things that is a part of your bio when folks are able to find you, and we'll get into that really quick here, but you do have a deep passion for running and for spinning. Yeah. So let's quickly kind of take a left and just chat about how important it is to have those certainly people have created professions around running and spinning, but how important is it to be able to stay connected with those things, and how important it is not only in your life but also your career.
Yeah, it is super important to me. I do use that as an outlet, and the interesting thing is that I never really thought about until I focus on what I'm doing now, is that even in those environments, the running and the cycling or spinning, I was a cycling instructor, and I was sitting in front of the room with the microphone on, and even that there's elements of leadership and being in front of people. And so I was like, I've really been a coach, literally, even in my personal life. And so it is important for me to experience that in environments outside of the office. And I use it as a way to practice my coaching in a totally different way. but also just to sweat. I think that's super important to have a release and to have that dedicated time. A lot of people talk about that being important, and I find it to be super important, especially as you're potentially doing something on your own, because you do need that time to think and to release. And for me, it does come in the form of just sweating. Yeah.
Sweating. I love it. So we would love for folks to be able to find you.
Yeah.
We've had a great conversation today, and we certainly want to be able to have future conversations with you. But if anyone's interested in reaching out to Tom, how do they find you?
So a couple ways. The first way is through my website. It's just engagedpursuit.com.
Great.
And from there, you'll find my email, which is just tom@engagedpursuit.com. You'll find my mobile number, and you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter called The Pursuit. So the best resources is really through my website.
Great. And of course, we'll have links to your website and to your ways to contact Tom through thecareerq.com. So, Tom, I can't thank you enough for coming in today. This has been so great. And we look forward to hearing more about your journey and that of your clients, both clients you have today and in the future. So thanks again. And we'll check out the show notes. We've got a ton of great information, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com, where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.